The mysterious connection. The cold emptiness of space stretched endlessly around Captain Ethan Voss's small exploration ship, the Wayfinder. It was supposed to be a simple scouting mission: scan the asteroid belt, collect data, and return home. But everything changed when his ship received an unusual distress signal. Ethan frowned at the blinking red light on his control panel. The signal was old, fragmented, and coming from empty space. There was no planet, no station, no wreckage, just silence. "Strange," he muttered. "AI, scan the area." His ship's AI responded in a calm voice. "No life forms detected. No ships. No debris. The signal source is unknown." Ethan's instincts screamed at him. This was not normal. Still, he had a job to do. He activated the thrusters and slowly approached the signal's coordinates. His ship shuddered. The lights flickered for a moment, then stabilized. What was that? Unknown energy interference detected. Before Ethan could react, a figure appeared in front of him. Right there, in the middle of his cockpit. A woman. She wasn't human. Her skin was a soft shade of silver blue, her long hair floating as if caught in an invisible breeze. Her eyes, glowing violet, locked onto his. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He grabbed his pulse pistol from the console and aimed at her. "Who are you?" he demanded. The woman didn't move. She stared at him, eyes filled with something between confusion and recognition. Then she spoke in a quiet, melodic voice. "I don't know." Ethan's grip on the pistol tightened. "You don't know?" She looked around the ship, her expression distant. "I was somewhere else. And now I am here, with you." The AI's voice interrupted. "Warning. An unknown entity is linked to your life signature, attempting to analyze connection." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Linked? What the hell does that mean?" The AI took a moment before answering. "The entity is now bound to you. If you move, she will follow. If you separate by more than 10 meters, both of you will experience extreme pain. If one of you dies, the other will also perish." Ethan froze. His heart pounded. "What?" he whispered. The woman's glowing eyes widened. She heard it too. She was stuck with him, and he was stuck with her. Ethan took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "Okay, let's start simple. Do you have a name?" The woman hesitated. Then, as if pulling from a distant memory, she whispered, "Syria." "Syria," Ethan repeated. "Fine. Do you remember how you got here?" She shook her head. "I only remember running, hiding. Then darkness. And now, you." Ethan felt a chill down his spine. What was she running from? Before he could ask more, the AI interrupted again. "Ship malfunction detected. Engines are failing." Ethan's hands flew over the controls. "What? Why?" "The energy signature from Syria is interfering with ship systems." Ethan snapped his head toward her. "You're causing this." Syria looked just as confused. "I don't know how." Suddenly, the entire ship shook violently. The lights flickered, and alarms blared. Ethan turned back to the controls. Something was outside. The radar flickered, struggling to read. But Ethan saw it, a shadow in space, moving fast, coming right toward them. Syria gasped, holding her head. Her voice trembled. "They found me." Ethan's heart pounded. Who? He didn't get to ask. The ship was under attack. The unseen threat. Ethan gripped the control panel as his ship, the Wayfinder, trembled under an unseen force. The alarms blared, flashing red warnings across the cockpit. "Shields are failing," the AI announced. "Unknown energy interference is increasing." Ethan cursed under his breath. He had survived battles, asteroid storms, and deep space anomalies. But this was something new, something unnatural. Behind him, Syria stood frozen, her violet eyes glowing brighter. She clutched her temples as if an invisible force was clawing at her mind. "They found me," she whispered, voice shaking. Ethan turned sharply. Who? Who found you?" Syria didn't answer. Instead, her entire body tensed, and a wave of energy pulsed outward from her, a ripple through space itself. The ship's lights flickered, screens glitched, and Ethan's pulse pistol, still holstered, began to hum with an eerie vibration. Ethan didn't believe in fate. He didn't believe in ghosts. But this felt like both. He had to act fast. Prepare evasive maneuvers. Full thrusters. Unable to comply. External force is preventing movement. Ethan's heart pounded. Something was holding his ship in place. A sharp, piercing noise rang through the cockpit, like 1,000 voices whispering in a language he didn't understand. Syria staggered, gasping, and then collapsed to her knees. Ethan caught her before she hit the floor. "Syria, what's happening?" She clutched his arm, her fingers cold. "They are inside my mind." Ethan's grip tightened. "Who are they?" "The ones chasing you." Syria forced herself to look at him. "The Zephyr." Ethan had never heard that name before. "Who are they?" he demanded. Syria's voice trembled. "A race older than your kind. They control space in ways you cannot imagine. And now, they have found us." Ethan barely had time to process this before the ship lurched violently. The gravitational field holding them in place tightened. It was as if space itself was folding in on them. Through the viewport, Ethan finally saw it. A shape in the darkness. At first, it looked like a distortion in space, like a ripple of heat over pavement. But then the outline of the vessel began to emerge from the void. Not a ship of metal and steel, but something that looked almost alive. It pulsed with an eerie blue glow, shifting like liquid shadow. A Zephyr vessel. Syria shuddered in his arms. "They are calling to me." Ethan pulled her closer. "I don't care who they are. They're not taking you." The ship's AI crackled. Warning. External entity attempting direct communication. Before Ethan could react, a voice echoed inside his mind. "The human does not understand. This one belongs to us." Ethan clenched his jaw. "The hell she does." Syria gasped, her entire body stiffening. A thin line of light pulsed down her spine, and she looked at Ethan with fear. "They will tear me apart," she whispered. "They will take back what I am." Ethan made his choice in an instant. Not happening. He slammed his fist onto the emergency override, cutting all power to the ship for a split second. The cockpit went dark. In that moment of stillness, he reached for Syria's hand. "Trust me." Before she could answer, Ethan activated the ship's emergency hyperjump. The Wayfinder roared to life, engines burning bright as it tore through space, escaping the Zephyr's hold. The last thing Ethan saw was the shadowy ship twisting in the void, and the last thing he heard was the voice in his mind. "You cannot run forever, human." Then, silence. The ship shot forward into the unknown, hunted across the stars. The silence after the jump was almost as terrifying as the chase itself. Captain Ethan Voss sat motionless in the pilot's chair, his knuckles white from gripping the controls. The Wayfinder had survived the emergency jump. But for how long? The ship's hull groaned, struggling under the stress of the maneuver. Across the cockpit, Syria was curled against the bulkhead, her glowing violet eyes unfocused. Her breathing was shallow, her skin even paler than before. Ethan exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. They had escaped, but not for long. Status report," he ordered. The ship's systems flickered before responding. Hull integrity at 72%. Engine core stable, but power reserves are low. Hyperdrive cooldown required. 4 hours. 4 hours. 4 long hours before they could jump again. Ethan glanced at Syria. She hadn't moved. He unbuckled his harness and knelt beside her. "Syria, talk to me." Her fingers twitched. When she looked at him, He saw something haunted in her expression. "They are still watching," she whispered. A chill crawled down Ethan's spine. He resisted the urge to look over his shoulder, as if something unseen was lurking in the darkness of space. "Who are they, Syria?" His voice was firm, but not unkind. "I need to know what we're dealing with." Syria's gaze flickered with uncertainty. "The Zephyr," she said. "They are not like your kind. They do not build with metal. They do not speak in sound. They exist in the spaces between." Ethan frowned. Spaces between what? She hesitated. Reality. That was not the answer he wanted to hear. He ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I don't care what they are. I just want to know how to stop them." Syria gave a weak, almost bitter smile. "You can't." Ethan clenched his jaw. That wasn't an option. He pushed himself to his feet. "AI, scan for nearby planets. We need a place to hide and make repairs." The ship hummed, and a moment later, the AI replied. "One possible location detected. Uncharted moon, Class M atmosphere, strong electromagnetic interference, likely to disrupt Zephyr tracking." Ethan nodded. "Good enough." As he prepared for descent, Syria shifted, looking suddenly uneasy. "What is it?" he asked. She shook her head. "The place we are going. Something is wrong. I feel it." Ethan hesitated for half a second. Then he shook his head. "Better than staying out here and waiting to die." He pushed the thrusters forward, sending the Wayfinder hurtling toward the moon. The hidden world. The planet below wasn't ordinary. As the Wayfinder descended through thick, swirling clouds, Ethan's sensors glitched. Readings flickered between normal and absolute chaos. Something about this place wasn't right. Syria sat rigid in her seat, fingers digging into the armrests. She wasn't looking at the screens. She was staring through the window as if she could see something Ethan couldn't. The surface came into view. Jagged mountains, deep canyons, strange glowing veins running through the rock like rivers of light. "This place is alive," Syria whispered. Ethan didn't like the sound of that. The AI spoke up. "Warning. Anomaly detected. Spatial readings inconsistent." Ethan cursed. "Define inconsistent." "Gravity fluctuating. Magnetic fields unstable. Readings suggest." The ship lurched. Ethan barely had time to grab the controls before everything twisted. The sky outside rippled, and suddenly, the Wayfinder wasn't flying toward the surface anymore. It was falling sideways. Ethan's stomach lurched as he fought the controls, but nothing responded. The ship was caught in something unnatural. Syria gasped. Ethan turned to her and froze. Her eyes. They weren't just glowing. They were flaring, streams of violet energy leaking from her pupils like liquid light. "Syria, what's happening?" She looked at him, her voice layered, like two people speaking at once. "They are here." The ship spun wildly, then slammed down hard. Everything went black. The arrival of the Zephyr. Ethan woke to the sound of static. His head throbbed. The ship's cockpit was in ruins. Sparks flew from shattered panels. Smoke curled through the air. The emergency lights cast everything in a dim red glow. Syria was gone. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He forced himself to his feet, coughing against the smoke. "Syria." No response. Then, a whisper. It didn't come from the ship's speakers. It didn't come from the AI. It came from everywhere. "We warned you, human." Ethan's blood turned ice cold. He turned, pulse pistol raised. The air in front of him shimmered like heat rising from pavement. Then, they appeared. The Zephyr. Not in the way he expected. Not as armored warriors. Not as creatures of flesh and blood. They were shadows in the air. Distorted figures that seemed to exist just outside reality. And standing among them, Syria. Her head was tilted downward, eyes glowing like stars. Ethan's hand clenched around his pistol. "Syria." She didn't move. One of the shadows stepped forward. It spoke, but not with sound. The words formed inside Ethan's skull. You cannot save her. She was always ours. Ethan's heart pounded. He refused to believe that. Gritting his teeth, he lifted the pistol and aimed. Then come take her from me. The shadows surged forward. The truth of Syria's existence. The shadows surged toward Ethan, moving like liquid darkness. He fired his pulse pistol, but the shots passed through them, scattering like mist in sunlight. They weren't physical. They weren't something he could fight. But he had no choice. Syria, he shouted. She stood motionless in the center of the cockpit, her glowing violet eyes fixed on the floor. Her face was blank, not asleep, not awake, trapped. Ethan clenched his jaw. She wasn't gone. She couldn't be. The Zephyr's whispering voices filled his mind again. Your defiance is meaningless, human. She is of us. She always was. Ethan fought the pressure in his skull. It was like their words weren't just sound. They were sinking into his thoughts, trying to force their way in. But he wasn't the kind of man who gave in easily. He took a step forward, his heart pounding. She's not yours. The Zephyr's forms twisted. A dozen voices spoke at once. You do not understand. The moment she was created, she belonged to us. Ethan gritted his teeth. Created? Syria's head lifted slightly. Her lips parted, as if trying to speak. One of the Zephyr figures raised an arm, or what passed for one. Syria gasped as the glow in her eyes pulsed, like something inside her was being activated against her will. Ethan didn't have time to think. He lunged forward, grabbing her shoulders. Syria, wake up. The instant his hands touched her, a surge of energy shot through him. Not just pain, but memories. Not his own. Hers. And in that moment, Ethan finally saw the truth. A creation, not a being. The visions came in flashes, fragments of a life she had never truly lived. Syria wasn't born. She was engineered. 1,000 years ago, the Zephyr created her as a living conduit, a vessel designed to control a forbidden force, something powerful enough to bend space and time. But something went wrong. Syria was meant to be an empty shell, a perfect being with no will of her own. A tool, a machine made of flesh. Yet somehow, against all odds, she became more. She developed a mind, emotions, and thoughts of her own. She rebelled. The Zephyr tried to erase her. She ran. For centuries, she drifted through space, escaping them over and over, until finally, her body could no longer hold its stolen freedom. Until she lost control and was drawn towards something unexpected. Ethan. The bond between them hadn't been a mistake. It hadn't been an accident. It had been Syria's last desperate act, her own soul reaching out for an anchor before she disappeared forever. And somehow, Ethan had become that anchor. The battle for Syria's will. Ethan staggered back as the visions faded, his breathing ragged. Syria's hands trembled at her sides. Her eyes, those glowing violet eyes, were filled with fear. They want to take me back, she whispered. The Zephyr's whispers grew louder. It is not a matter of want. You are ours, and the human will not stop us. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow and laughed bitterly. You think I'll just hand her over? The shadows rippled. You do not have a choice. And then they attacked. This time, it wasn't just whispers. The darkness twisted into reality, forming razor-sharp tendrils that lashed toward Ethan. He barely dodged the first strike, rolling behind a control panel. His pulse pistol was useless, but he wasn't out of options. AI, divert all power to electromagnetic shielding. The ship's lights flickered, shielding at 60%. Estimated survival time. 2 minutes, not long enough. Ethan's mind raced. Think. Syria stood in the center of it all, frozen in fear. The Zephyr were inside her head, trying to rip her will apart. If she didn't fight back, she would be gone. And if she was gone, Ethan would die too. Syria, he shouted over the chaos. You're stronger than them. You're not their weapon anymore." She shuddered, tears forming in her glowing eyes. "They are too strong." Ethan clenched his fists. "Then let me help you." She turned to him, eyes widening. And in that moment, Ethan grabbed her hand. The bond between them flared to life. For the first time, Ethan felt it, not just the connection, but the power inside her. It was vast, endless, and she had been terrified of it for so long. But now she wasn't alone. Ethan squeezed her hand. "Syria, look at me." She did. And in that instant, something changed. Her fear melted away. The glow in her eyes sharpened. The whispers of the Zephyr stuttered. And then, for the first time, Syria did something none of them expected. She fought back. The turning point. The cockpit exploded with light. The Zephyr screamed, their voices twisting into distorted echoes. The darkness that surrounded them began to unravel. Syria stood tall, her body radiating pure energy. "You don't know me," she whispered. Then, with a single movement, she raised her hand, and the Zephyr were ripped apart. The shadows howled as they were torn from existence, cast back into the void. The ship's alarms flickered off. The weight pressing on Ethan's mind vanished. And then it was over. Syria stood in the middle of the cockpit, breathing heavily, her hands still trembling. The glow in her eyes faded to something softer. Ethan wiped sweat from his face. Well, that was intense. Syria turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I didn't know I could do that." Ethan smirked. "Looks like you're more than just a runaway experiment." She hesitated, then whispered, "I think I'm something else now." Ethan exhaled, glancing out the viewport. The Zephyr were gone. For now. But something told him this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Sacrifice and survival. The silence in the cockpit was unsettling. Syria stood motionless, staring at her trembling hands, still glowing faintly with the power she had unleashed. Ethan could see the emotions flickering in her violet eyes. Shock, fear, and something else. Something new. Freedom. For the first time in her existence, she had defied the Zephyr. She had fought back. But the victory felt hollow. Ethan let out a breath and collapsed into the pilot's chair. "That was fun," he muttered. Syria turned to him, blinking. "Fun." He chuckled dryly. "Well, nearly getting torn apart by shadow creatures isn't exactly my idea of a good time. But hey, we're still breathing." Syria exhaled, her shoulders dropping slightly. For now. That part bothered Ethan. The Zephyr didn't seem like the type to give up. He had seen what they could do, bend reality, invade minds, control people. If they wanted Syria badly enough, they wouldn't stop hunting her. And he was caught in the middle of it. "You did good, Syria," Ethan said, watching her closely. "You fought back." She didn't answer right away. She flexed her fingers, watching as small flickers of energy danced across her skin. Then she whispered, "What if I become worse than them?" Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" She slowly looked at him. "The Zephyr made me to control power beyond understanding. If I embrace it fully, what if I lose myself?" Ethan studied her for a long moment. She was afraid of herself, afraid of what she was becoming. He shook his head. "Listen, Syria. You're not them. You're not a machine. You made a choice." She hesitated, then gave a slow nod. But before she could say anything else, the ship's alarms screamed. Ethan's stomach dropped. Not again. He turned to the controls. "Aye. Report." The voice crackled through the speakers. "Multiple vessels inbound. Zephyr energy signatures detected. Estimated arrival. 3 minutes." Syria's hands clenched. "They're coming." Ethan cursed. They had barely survived the first attack, and now a fleet was closing in on them. "We need an escape plan," he said. Syria looked toward the viewport. Outside, the strange, glowing planet stretched below them, vast and mysterious. "This place," she whispered. There's something beneath the surface, something hidden. Ethan frowned. How do you know that? She met his gaze. Because it's calling to me. That wasn't comforting. But he didn't have time to argue. If the Zephyr were coming, they needed a way out. Fast. The descent into the unknown. Ethan engaged the thrusters. Hold on. The wayfinder tilted, diving toward the surface of the strange moon. The moment they entered the atmosphere, the ship's controls went wild. The gravity fluctuated, pulling them in different directions. The sensors failed completely. Ethan fought the controls, sweat forming on his brow. It was like the planet didn't want them to land. Syria suddenly gasped, gripping the dashboard. There, below the mountains. Ethan glanced at the screen. What looked like a massive crater stretched across the surface, but as the ship got closer, he realized it wasn't a crater at all. It was a structure. A massive ancient city buried beneath layers of rock and time, and it was still alive. Strange lights flickered along its ruins. Energy pulsed through its veins. It looked like the skeleton of something once powerful, something waiting to wake up, and Syria was being drawn to it. Not sure I like this, Ethan muttered. But we don't have a choice. He angled the ship toward the ruins. Behind them, the Zephyr fleet tore through the atmosphere. They weren't running anymore. They were going to fight. The battle beneath the surface. The ship crashed into the ruins, skidding across ancient stone. Ethan barely managed to keep control, guiding the wayfinder into a narrow cavern. The ship groaned to a halt. Smoke filled the air. Ethan coughed, unstrapping himself. Everyone still breathing. Syria nodded, but her eyes were distant. She was listening to something Ethan couldn't hear. Then, a deep, rumbling sound echoed through the ruins. Ethan's heart pounded. What the hell was that? Syria stepped forward. It's waking up. Ethan grabbed his pulse pistol and followed her out of the ship. The ruins stretched endlessly in every direction. Gigantic stone towers. Walls covered in strange symbols. Syria placed a hand on one of the walls. The moment she touched it, the entire structure came to life. Energy pulsed through the ruins. The air hummed with power. Ethan took a step back. Syria, what are you doing? She turned to him, eyes glowing brighter than ever. This place is part of what I am, she said. The Zephyr thought they made me. But they only stole a piece of something older. Ethan swallowed hard. Meaning? She turned toward the entrance. Outside, the Zephyr soldiers were descending. Their shadowy forms rippled through the mist. They think they control power, Syria said softly. But they've forgotten where it came from. Ethan had no idea what she meant, but he wasn't going to let her face them alone. He cocked his pistol and took a step forward. You ready? She smiled slightly. You can't kill shadows, Captain. Ethan smirked. Then let's make them wish they had bodies. The Zephyr attacked. Syria raised her hands, and the ruins answered. The entire city roared to life, its ancient energy surging through Syria like a conduit. For the first time, she wasn't just fighting back. She was becoming what she was meant to be. The ground shook. The shadows screamed. Ethan gritted his teeth, shielding his eyes from the blinding energy. And in that moment, he realized, this battle wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about ending the Zephyr, once and for all. The final choice. The ruins trembled, responding to Syria's touch, like a slumbering beast stirring from a long sleep. Ethan stood at her side, gripping his pulse pistol, watching in disbelief as the Zephyr surrounded them. Dark, shifting figures that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. But something was different now. Syria wasn't afraid. Her eyes glowed with the same energy pulsing through the ancient city. The symbols on the walls flickered, their forgotten power awakening after centuries of silence. Ethan's instincts screamed at him. Something was about to change. A Zephyr stepped forward, its voice seeping into Ethan's mind like oil slipping through cracks. You were never meant to awaken, child. Syria turned to face them, her expression unreadable. You took me from this place. You tried to make me yours, but I was never yours to control. The Zephyr's form twisted angrily. You misunderstand. You were never meant to have a will. You are not alive, Syria. You are a conduit, a vessel. And now, you will return to what you were meant to be. Syria did not move. Ethan did. He raised his pulse pistol and fired. The blast hit the Zephyr, but just like before, the energy passed through it, vanishing into nothing. The shadows hissed. Ethan gritted his teeth. Figures. Syria turned slightly. You can't fight them like that. Yeah, I noticed. She placed a hand on his chest, a surge of warmth flooding through him. The moment she pulled away, his gun hummed with the same energy that pulsed through the ruins. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Try now, she said. He didn't hesitate. He fired, and this time the blast struck the Zephyr directly. The shadowy figure screamed, its form fracturing like shattered glass before evaporating into the air. Ethan smirked. That's more like it. The other Zephyr hissed in unison. They didn't waste time. They attacked. The ruins erupted into battle. The battle for Syria's soul. The Zephyr moved like living darkness, flowing across the battlefield, attacking in coordinated waves. Ethan fought with everything he had, using his newly charged weapon to tear through the creatures. For the first time, they were vulnerable. But no matter how many he took down, more kept coming. Syria, meanwhile, stood in the center of it all, her hands outstretched, channeling the power of the ruins. Stone structures lifted into the air, floating like weightless fragments of a forgotten world. The energy around her intensified, but Ethan could see it. Something was wrong. Syria's hand shook, her face twisted with pain. The power was consuming her. Ethan cursed under his breath, shooting down another Zephyr before turning back to her. Syria, you need to slow down. She didn't hear him. The Zephyr weren't just attacking. They were trying to overwhelm her mind. Syria shuddered, gripping her head, as if something was clawing inside her skull. A deep, ancient voice whispered through the ruins, louder than the others. Darker, colder. You cannot resist us forever. You are still our creation, still bound to us. Syria's breath came in ragged gasps. No, I'm not. Ethan saw it. The Zephyr were winning. She was losing herself, and if they took her, she wouldn't come back. Ethan ran to her, dodging enemy fire, ignoring the pain from his wounds. He grabbed her shoulders. Syria, listen to me. She didn't respond. Her body wasn't even solid anymore. Her form flickered, like she was being pulled between realities. Ethan refused to let that happen. You're not just power, he said. You're not just their weapon. You're more than that. Her eyes flickered toward him, full of fear. What if I can't stop them? She whispered. Ethan tightened his grip. Then we stopped them together. A beat of silence. Then, something changed. Syria closed her eyes. The trembling in her body stilled. When she opened them again, the fear was gone. She was in control. She turned toward the Zephyr, lifting her hand. You stole my power, she whispered, but you never understood it. And then she let go. The energy inside her erupted, not as a weapon, but as a force of pure will. The ruins shook. The Zephyr screamed. And reality itself broke apart. The end of the Zephyr. The shadows tried to flee, but there was nowhere to run. The power of the ruins tore through them, unraveling them at their very core. They weren't just being destroyed. They were being erased. Ethan shielded his eyes as the last of the Zephyr vanished into nothing. And then, silence. He lowered his arm. The battlefield was empty. The Zephyr were gone. The ruins dimmed, their energy fading. Their purpose, whatever it had once been, was fulfilled. Syria swayed, exhausted. Ethan caught her before she collapsed. Hey, stay with me. She gave a weak smile. It's over. He exhaled. Yeah, it is. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't. Syria was something new now. No longer Zephyr. No longer just a creation. She was something the universe had never seen before. And that terrified him. She met his gaze, as if sensing his thoughts. "Ethan." He shook his head, forcing a grin. "We'll figure it out." But in the back of his mind, one question still haunted him. If Syria wasn't their weapon anymore, then what was she? Breaking the chains of fate. The battlefield was quiet. Too quiet. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears as he knelt beside Syria, still gripping her arm as she swayed with exhaustion. The ruins around them, once pulsing with ancient energy, had dimmed. The Zephyr were gone, erased by Syria's unleashed power. But the air still crackled, charged with something unsettled. Ethan tightened his hold on Syria as he scanned their surroundings. "Syria, you still with me?" She blinked slowly, her glowing violet eyes dimming to a softer hue. "I think so." Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. Hell of a way to win a fight. Syria tried to smile, but her body flickered, shifting between solid and something else entirely. Ethan's stomach twisted. That wasn't good. "Hey," he said, gripping her shoulders. "What's happening?" Syria's expression grew distant. She looked down at her hands, watching as energy pulsed beneath her skin like liquid light. "I used too much," she whispered. I don't think my body can contain it anymore." Ethan felt a chill crawl down his spine. "What do you mean, contain it?" She met his gaze, something sorrowful in her eyes. "I was made to channel power, Ethan. I wasn't made to be this." Her body flickered again, more violently this time. The stone beneath her feet cracked as an unseen force radiated outward. Ethan clenched his jaw. No, you're not doing this." Syria's breath hitched. "I don't think I have a choice." The realization hit him like a gut punch. She was breaking apart. Not dying, becoming something else. And if she lost control, the power inside her could tear her apart completely. Ethan refused to accept that. He grabbed her hands, ignoring the burning sensation as raw energy pulsed against his skin. "Listen to me. You're not a conduit anymore. You're not just power. You're a person. You chose this, so now you choose to stay." Syria's eyes widened, her flickering slowing for a brief second. "But." "No buts." Ethan's grip tightened. "You're not going anywhere. You hear me?" Syria let out a shaky breath. The ruins around them trembled. The energy inside her fought against her control, threatening to rip free. She looked at him, desperate. "What if I can't hold it back?" Ethan smirked. "Then I'll hold it with you." And then he pulled her into an embrace. The moment their bodies touched, something shifted. The raw energy inside Syria flowed into him. But it didn't burn. It merged. Their bond, the invisible force that had linked them from the beginning, flared to life. Syria gasped, clinging to him as her body stabilized. The energy no longer raged out of control. It balanced. And for the first time, Syria was whole. She looked up at him, eyes still glowing but no longer afraid. "Ethan, what did you do?" He exhaled, a wry grin forming. "Hell if I know. Just figured I'd improvise." Syria let out a soft, breathless laugh. Then the ruins shifted. Ethan tensed, stepping in front of Syria on instinct. Now what? A deep, resonant hum filled the air. The ancient walls lit up again, but this time, the energy felt different, calm, purposeful. Syria turned toward the glowing symbols. "It's waiting." Ethan frowned. "For what?" Syria hesitated, then placed her hand against the nearest wall. The energy surged, but it didn't consume her. Instead, it answered. A deep, almost melodic voice whispered through the ruins. "The cycle is broken. The chains are undone. You are no longer a creation of the Zephyr. You are something new." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Great, now who the hell am I talking to?" The symbols pulsed. the remnants of what came before. Syria inhaled sharply. This place, it wasn't just a ruin. It was alive. Ethan stared at the glowing walls. You're saying this whole damned city is some kind of ancient intelligence? The voice hummed in response. Once, but time has unraveled much. What remains now is knowledge and a choice. Ethan glanced at Syria. What choice? She stepped forward, listening. Then she whispered, They're asking if I want to become something more. Ethan's chest tightened. Define more. Syria's fingers brushed against the pulsing symbols. I was created to be a conduit, a vessel for power. But now, I have a chance to be more than that, to become something beyond what the Zephyr ever imagined. Ethan didn't like where this was going. You mean like a god? Syria turned to him, smiling softly. No, just free. The ruins hummed in approval. Freedom comes with a price. Ethan clenched his fists. What kind of price? Syria met his gaze. If I accept, I won't be just me anymore. I'll become something bigger, something connected to this place forever. Ethan felt his stomach drop. And if you refuse, Syria exhaled, then I stay as I am. But the power inside me, it won't last. It will consume me eventually. A bitter laugh escaped Ethan's lips. So you either burn out or ascend. She gave a sad nod. Ethan hated this. He had fought so damn hard to keep her alive, only for the universe to throw this choice at them. Syria stepped closer, reaching for his hand. Ethan, what do I do? His heart pounded. You're asking me. She smiled. You're the first person who ever let me choose. Ethan swallowed hard. Then, after a long moment, he spoke. You choose what makes you you, not what they made you for, not what they expect. Just you. Syria's eyes softened. Then she made her choice. She turned to the ruins, lifting her hand. I accept. The ruins lit up, not in mourning, but in welcome. Ethan shielded his eyes as Syria's body glowed, her form merging with the ancient power. For a split second, she was everywhere, in the air, in the walls, in the energy around them. And then, she was standing in front of him again. Still Syria, still herself, but now, something more. She exhaled, looking at her hands. I'm still here. Ethan grinned. Damn right you are. She smiled, something brighter than before. And I'm free. Ethan let out a breath of relief. So, what now? Syria turned toward the stars. We write our own story. Ethan smirked, stepping beside her. Well then, let's get started. And together, they walked into the unknown. Final thoughts and ending. Syria has broken free of her fate, forging a new destiny beyond what anyone imagined. The Zephyr are gone, but the universe is vast, and new challenges await. But this time, Syria isn't running. She's choosing her own path. And Ethan, he's right there with her.